Hey guys, welcome to episode 5 of First Chapter Friday. So today I'm bringing you a book from the action and adventure genre. It is a book called Elemental by Anthony John. I chose this one for a lot of reasons because it is in the action adventure genre and haven't done one from that yet. And then also because it also goes really well with the science fiction and dystopian genre from last week's video when I talked about Tesla's Attic. It was science fiction, dystopian, and this is definitely a dystopian novel, but it's also action and adventure. I also chose it because it was a Truman Award nominee in 2014-2015. I also chose it because it is the first in a series of 3. So this first one is called Elemental. The second one is called Firebrand. And the third one is called Renegade. Now, the last reason I chose this is because this guy, Anthony John, he lives in St. Louis, Missouri. So if you are in Breakfast Reading Club, you have maybe seen him before because he always goes to Warrensburg to the Children's Literature Festival. And he will be at the festival again this year. So you will be able to meet him this year. And he has a British accent. He's not from St. Louis. He just lives in St. Louis with his family. So he has a really thick British accent. And I got to go see him speak about this book. And it kind of got my curiosity piqued. Because it's about this kid. His name is Thomas. He feels like an outsider in his family because he does not have a special power. They all have powers of the elements. Earth, wind, fire... water is the other one. So everyone in his little colony has a power of an elemental power, but he does not. But then eventually something happens and he discovers something that kind of turns his world upside down. It's not what he was expecting. So anyway, this is the book that I'm going to read to you the first chapter of for First Chapter Friday. So enjoy. Here we go. Elemental by Anthony John. Chapter 1. Thunder rattled the aging wooden cabins, but no one stopped to listen. There wasn't time for that. The coming storm was written in every distant flash of lightning and in the thick, heavy clouds hanging over the ocean. The pelicans flying by in tight formation groaned in warning. Even the air tasted strange and unnatural. Okay, you know, right before it rains, how it kind of feels weird outside, or you can kind of like smell the rain coming? I think that's what he's talking about here. So how had Kite, guardian of the wind, missed it completely? Usually Kite predicted storms a day in advance. He would tell us how strong the wind would be. With a guardian of the water, he'd warn how high the oceans would rise. And though I found it hard to imagine the clear blue sky roiling with clouds, and the usually calm ocean turned inside out, I knew better than to doubt him. It was his element, after all. "Swell rising!" yelled Kite. He crouched beside a stick planted firmly in the sand. It marked the highest point he expected the ocean to reach. As everyone turned to look, the water washed right over and dragged it out to sea. He closed his eyes. Tension carved lines in his face. He was engaging his element, but it had never looked so difficult before. "Wind speed increasing!" shouted another guardian. "I know, it's my element!" exclaimed Kite, as though he owned the wind itself, not just the ability to read it. Meanwhile, my father stood side by side with my older brother, I can never say this name. Anais, at the colony's rainwater harvester. They looked alike. Same thick, dark hair and serious expression. They conjured sparks from their fingertips, tiny flames that grew and combined into a white, hot glow. Okay, so what's their element? Fire. Anais directed the heat into a bent nail while our father straightened it and drove it back into the oak paneling. However bad the storm might be, we couldn't afford to lose our only water source. All the guardians were busy now, their elements in full effect. As the first and only child born without an element, I watched them enviously. I couldn't summon fire, I couldn't unearth food, predict storms, or catch fish barehanded. But I could toss sandbags against the stilts supporting our cabin, and so I did, one after another, as my arms burned and sweat poured down my forehead. "Shouldn't you be loading the evacuation canoes, Thomas?" Kite's voice was low and threatening. "Alice is taking the last bags now," I said, pointing to the girl sprinting across the beach, sure-footed and powerful, 2 bulky canvas bags slung across her shoulders. He followed my eyes and shouted, "Do you like having to do everything yourself, Alice?" As she turned her head, the wind tousled her dark hair. She peered at Kite from the corner of her eye, but she didn't answer. "I'm talking to you, Alice!" She dropped the bags. "Does it matter what I like?" Her eyes drifted to me, and she cocked an eyebrow. Anyway, you spent years trying to keep Thomas and me apart. Why don't you want to help now? Help me now. Kite's face reddened. How dare you speak to a guardian like that? You're not an apprentice yet, remember? And I hope I never will be, she smiled. Are we done now? The other guardians stopped what they were doing and watched with interest. Kite obviously knew it too. He'd have to take action, punish Alice yet again, just to save face. It was all so predictable. Couldn't we just have one afternoon without Alice battling the guardians head-on, when she could be spared their pointless attempts to tame her? The storm would be upon us soon. There wasn't time for this. Why do you think you missed the storm, Guardian Kite? I asked. The words came out quickly, a thinly veiled attempt to distract him. You know, since your element is wind? Kite's mouth twisted into a mocking smile. Why? Did you foresee it before me, Thomas? Did you forget to just mention it to us? Okay, he's making fun of him because Thomas doesn't have a power. So he's like, why? Did your power tell you what was coming? Well, duh, no, because he doesn't have a power. I sensed the guardian's stare shifting to me. I wasn't meaning to criticize. It's just strange. Almost like your element didn't... What? Like my element didn't what? Kite lifted a sandbag as though it weighed nothing, and launched it several yards. I think that you, of all people, would have more respect for the elements. Without a sound, my younger brother Griffin joined me. Being deaf, he learned to read the guardian's body language better than anyone. Having him beside me should have been a warning to say something, but I'd only spoken up to save Alice. I'm just trying to understand. And you think now is the time for all that? Kite raised his hand toward the darkening sky. Some of us have work to do, and not enough time to do it. Can you at least respect that? My pulse raced. Anger coursed through me. You wouldn't be in such a hurry if you'd predicted the storm like you're supposed to. Until you have something to offer this colony, he spat, I suggest you keep your thoughts to yourself. Exactly, echoed my father. I hadn't heard him approaching. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, but his voice was loud and fierce. He fixed his eyes on Kite. After all, those with elements should always be allowed to speak. True, and if Thomas discovers an element, I'll be sure to listen. And how do you suggest he finds one? Kite shrugged, but the mocking smile was back. It's difficult for sure, especially so late in childhood. My father's grip tightened. Pain swept through me. As things stand, he's nothing. As you say, returned Kite smoothly. Nothing. I felt anger flash through my father's claw-like fingers, sharp enough to make me wince, and then he pulled away. I waited for him to come to my defense again, to match Kite word for word. He'd supported me for 16 years. I expected nothing less now. When I looked at him, it was as if he was done fighting, or worse, if he agreed with Kite. Nothing. The word hung in the air like a fork of lightning seen long after it had vanished. Of course, it was difficult for Father to have a son with no element. It was even harder for me, but he'd always told me to be patient. Had he been lying all those years? Was this how he really felt? There were only 14 people in our colony, but every single one of them stood still and silent, eyes fixed uneasily on the ground. My hands balled into fists by my sides. My heart beat wildly. I can throw insults too, I thought. I could have asked Kite why his weather predictions were increasingly unreliable. I could have asked my father why his element was so much weaker than his oldest son's. But I didn't say anything, because in the end, they still had an element and I didn't. Something was better than nothing. I kept my head up and began to walk, quick, uneven strides that couldn't carry me away fast enough. My father called to me, but I didn't turn back. As soon as I crossed the dunes, I broke into a run. Sand slipped beneath me. I couldn't seem to get a grip on anything. The earth, my pulse, my life. I didn't stop running until I reached the narrow woods that ran like a spine down the center of Hatteras Island. I placed my left hand against a pine tree and punched the trunk with my right. Mosquitoes landed on me, and I didn't flick them away. I closed my eyes and welcomed a different kind of pain. Are you all right? I spun around. Alice stood before me, bags still hanging from her shoulders. She must have run too, but she didn't even seem out of breath. I'm fine. Liar. Her blue eyes blazed. She was a year younger than me, but that was easy to forget when she was angry. Ignore them, Thomas. Ignore them all. Easy for you to say. Why? Because I have an element and you don't? She snorted. I can barely conjure a spark, let alone make a fire. It's a pathetic excuse for an element, and you know it. Well, at least it's something. She dropped the bags and folded her long tan arms. Sinewy muscles showed through the dull coat of white sand. When are you going to start fighting back? I just did, remember? I don't mean for me or Griffin. I mean for you. Who should I be fighting? Kite? Anyone, everyone, go ahead and hurt them. Do it so they'll never look at you the same way again. Is that how you got to be so popular? Alice just smiled. See, so much anger inside you. You need to let it out. There was a rustle behind us. A girl stood beneath the canopy of a young tree. She fingered the ends of her long blonde hair anxiously. Alex huffed. What a surprise. I didn't expect Kite to send you so soon, Rose. I figured he had more important things to do than worry about Tom and me. My father didn't send me. Of course not. Alice retrieved her bags and walked away. She didn't look back. Once Alice was out of sight, Rose knelt down on a bed of pine needles. She tugged the ends of her white tunic toward her knees, but the material rode up again. Her skin was smooth and pale, unblemished by scars. My father shouldn't say those things to you, Rose said, voice almost lost on the wind. I sat down with my back against the trunks. Have you told him that? She looked away. Suddenly I felt guilty instead of angry. Alice doesn't think an element is important. Oh, sorry. Thomas said that. Alice doesn't think an element is important, I said. But she's wrong. If I had yours, if I could read the water the way you do, everything would be different. Unlike Alice, Rose didn't disagree. I was grateful for that. You'll find your element, she said, summoning a smile. I'm sure of it. Why do you keep saying that? You swam like a fish before you could even walk. Elements reveal themselves early. Not when you're 16. Her smile never faltered. Look at your brother. Griffin's right leg doesn't work properly, and he has ears, but he has ears, but he can't hear. Maybe you have an element and it just doesn't work yet. I wanted to believe her, but I'd already passed the age of apprenticeship. There would be no silver lining to the cloud that had followed me my entire life. A gust of wind bent the trees and scattered the needles. The first drops of rain came with it. I believe in you, Thomas, she said. I always have. I want you to know that. For a moment she held my gaze, and I knew that she was telling the truth. I might be nothing to the colony, but I mattered to Rose. Her fingers drifted to the wooden bangle on her left wrist. She twisted it around and around. It was what she always did when she was nervous. She had carved the bangle herself, just as she'd sewn the band of white cloth that held her hair back from her face, and the pretty linen tunic that fit her so differently than the one stitched together by the guardians. My pulse quickened again, but this time there was no hint of anger. Instead, I felt something even more powerful, something I've been feeling more and more over the past 2 years, something that left me as empty as having no element. We should go, I said quickly before my face gave me away. I pulled myself up and offered my hand to Rose. She didn't take it, though. Then again, no one but my father touched me or held me. It was as if having no element was contagious. And who could risk losing their greatest power? Rose stood now. She was much shorter than me, but looking at her was like watching myself. Same unsure expression, same way of shuffling her feet like she wasn't sure what to do with them. Was she thinking the same thing as me, too? Deep down, did she want to touch me as much as I wanted to touch her? You're right, she said, breaking the connection. We should go. No, an element wasn't the only thing I'd never have. So I think he's afraid that he'll never be able to fall in love. Like, no one will love him because he doesn't have an element, I guess. That's kind of what I got from that. So anyway, if you want to continue reading, it is Elemental by Anthony John. It is in the Orange Action Adventure section. Go to JOH and look for this book. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next week.